The gravel in the parking lot shifted and crunched under Sarah's hiking boots as she stepped out of her rental car. Morning sunlight stretched long shadows from the weathered wooden buildings of Thompson's shooting range, and the air was a blend of gun oil, dust, and the faint, resinous scent of pine drifting from the surrounding Montana forest. She pulled her jacket a little tighter, not against the mild air, but against the knot of tension that had lived in her for months. The parking lot told its own story. Rusted pickups with gun racks sat beside mud-caked ATVs, and one pristine SUV gleamed like an outsider, probably belonging to someone like her. Her boots were spotless, her jacket crisp and clean, the kind of gear sold in upscale outdoor stores. Everything about her appearance suggested a weekend adventurer rather than someone at ease in a place like this. Her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her purse. She pressed them against her jeans, trying to still the shake that had never left since her time overseas. Inside, the range office smelled of old paper and solvent. Faded hunting magazines were stacked in uneven piles. Mounted deer heads stared down with glassy eyes that seemed to track her movements. Behind the counter sat Bill Thompson, a man with the kind of weathered face and hard-set mouth that spoke of years lived on his own terms. His gray beard was neatly kept, but his eyes carried a watchfulness that didn't soften. He glanced up from his paperwork and asked if she was the Martinez woman, his gravelly voice betraying decades of cigarette smoke. When she confirmed, he took her in with a look that weighed and measured. "Alaska," he said, reading from the form, "Wildlife Research." The words came with the kind of half-smile that questioned her reasons without asking directly. He had the presence of a man used to sorting people into categories before they proved him wrong or right. Sarah felt his gaze linger a moment too long before he looked back at the papers on his desk. She knew this was the part where people built their first impression of her. She also knew she wanted it to be wrong. Outside, the sharp scent of pine mixed with the metallic tang of old rifles as the sound of distant target practice broke the morning stillness. Bill made a small note on the form, his pen scratching over paper, and Sarah could feel his eyes on her again, quiet and assessing, as if already wondering what lay beneath her polished exterior. Janet arrived first, all nervous energy and bright chatter, explaining to anyone within earshot that she was a real estate agent from Billings who wanted to feel safer during late-night property showings. Her jacket was stylish and impractical, and she clutched a small notebook like she might be quizzed on the material. Mark followed, an accountant with a neat part in his hair, adjusting his glasses as if preparing for an exam. He admitted, almost apologetically, that his wife had bought him the course for his birthday. The last to arrive were Tyler and Madison, two college kids in matching hoodies who giggled at the mounted deer heads on the wall and snapped selfies when they thought Bill wasn't looking. Bill moved them outside to the range, the air sharper now with the smell of gunpowder from distant lanes. He handed out rifles with the casual authority of someone who knew every flaw in his inventory. Janet received a light .22 that looked nearly new. Mark got a clean, well-maintained .243 with a decent scope. Tyler and Madison were given identical rifles, properly zeroed and easy to handle. When Bill reached Sarah, his grin took on a knowing edge. From the far end of the rack, he brought out a battered .308. The stock was cracked and bound with electrical tape, the barrel showing a slight bend. The scope sat at an odd tilt, its mount long since loosened. He placed it in her hands with a tone that dripped condescension, telling her the rifle had character. Sarah accepted it without comment. Her hands moved automatically, finding the safety, testing the bolt, and gauging the trigger pull with practiced subtlety. The tremor that had been in her fingers earlier seemed to fade as she handled the weapon. She loaded the magazine with a quiet focus, each cartridge sliding home with the soft click of familiarity. It was a ritual she didn't think about anymore, the kind that came from repetition over years, not days. The others lined up, their first attempts a scattered mess. Janet jerked the trigger hard enough to throw her shots wide. Mark closed his eyes as he fired, flinching at each report. Tyler buried rounds in the dirt berm several feet below his target, while Madison managed to put 2 bullets through the roof of the shelter. Drawing a sharp rebuke from Bill, Sarah stayed back, leaning slightly on her lane partition, observing. Her eyes moved between the others, catching their mistakes with an instructor's clarity she didn't voice. She didn't need to be first. For now, she could remain unnoticed. The range echoed with uneven gunfire, brass casings rattling on concrete, the faint metallic tang of discharged rounds hanging in the air. Bill's gaze drifted toward her now and then, the way a man might glance at a card face down on a table, wondering if it was worth flipping over. Sarah kept her own expression neutral. The weight of the defective rifle balanced easily in her hands, waiting for the moment when she would be called forward. Bill's voice carried easily down the firing line, the tone somewhere between challenge and amusement. He called her city girl and told her to show them what she could do with that piece of junk. The other students welcomed the break from their own frustration, lowering rifles and stepping aside so they could watch. Janet hugged her notebook to her chest. Mark adjusted his glasses with a faint smirk, and Tyler and Madison leaned forward as though expecting a spectacle for all the wrong reasons. Sarah moved to lane 5 with the battered .308 resting in the crook of her arm. She stepped into position without hesitation, left foot slightly forward, weight balanced. The stock settled into her shoulder in a single smooth motion. Her cheek found its place as if the rifle had been fitted to her years ago. Through the off-kilter scope, the target at 100 yards appeared small and distorted. She saw the flaws instantly. The scope's alignment would throw elevation high. The barrel's bend would drag the round right. She adjusted in her mind, calculating before her breathing evened out. The world narrowed to the reticle and the faint sway of the crosshairs in rhythm with her chest. Inhale. Exhale halfway. Hold. The trigger had more creep than it should, breaking at just over 4.5 pounds. She pressed it straight back, steady and unhurried. The shot cracked through the air, the recoil absorbed without thought. The sound echoed off the mountain slope, fading into the tree line. She cycled the bolt and was already settling for the next shot before the others processed the first. Bill didn't look right away. Experience told him the rifle was hopeless for beginners. Then Janet's voice rose in a hushed exclamation, and he brought the binoculars to his eyes. The round had punched directly through the bullseye, obliterating the small X-ring at the center. The second shot landed in the same place, the third tight against it. By the fourth, Bill's fingers had tightened on the binoculars. Every round vanished into the same ragged hole. Her follow-through was flawless, eyes fixed on the target a beat after each shot. No wasted movement. She adjusted for wind shift so subtle the others wouldn't have noticed them at all. By the 8th shot, the bullseye was gone entirely, replaced by a clean-edged crater the size of a quarter. Tyler's mouth hung open. Madison had forgotten to hold her phone. Mark cleaned his glasses again, convinced he was imagining it. Janet's notebook dangled forgotten in her hand. The 9th and 10th rounds joined the same group without deviation. Sarah lowered the rifle only when the magazine was empty. She stood still for a moment, eyes on the target, expression unreadable. The defective weapon that should have embarrassed her now lay across her arms like an old companion. Bill lowered the binoculars slowly, his face tight with a new calculation. This wasn't luck or even ordinary competence. This was the discipline of someone who had put in thousands of hours behind a rifle, under conditions where missing was not an option. As Sarah began clearing the weapon with the same unthinking precision she had used to load it, he watched her hands and saw muscle memory no casual hunter ever possessed. The others were still murmuring in disbelief, but Bill's mind was already somewhere else, turning over questions that suddenly seemed far more urgent than teaching marksmanship to weekend shooters. The range had gone quiet during the break, the sharp cracks of gunfire replaced by low conversation and the occasional clink of brass casings being swept from the concrete. Sarah stood near the benches, showing Madison how to settle her cheek against the stock without straining her neck. Her voice was calm, her tone patient, and her movements deliberate as she adjusted the girl's stance with a light touch. To anyone watching, she was just another student helping out. But Bill noticed how her eyes kept drifting toward the tree line, her awareness never fully leaving the environment. He stepped back toward the office, his boots crunching over gravel. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled faintly of oil and old paper. He pulled her application from the clipboard, the form perfectly filled out in tight, uniform handwriting. The lines for employment and address history were neat and complete. No gaps, no corrections. It was the kind of clean record that looked good on paper but didn't feel right in his gut. Bill picked up the phone and scrolled through the numbers until he found Jake Morrison. Jake had been a wiry 20-year-old when they served together in Vietnam, and now his voice still carried the same dry edge. Bill asked for a favor, to run a background check on a Sarah Martinez, late 20s, from Colorado, with a job lined up in Alaska. Jake didn't question the request, just said he'd call back. Bill paced the narrow office, the mounted deer heads watching like silent witnesses. Outside, Sarah was laughing at something Janet said, the sound light but her posture still squared, still measuring distances. The phone rang again 20 minutes later. Jake's voice was different now, lower, carrying weight. He told Bill that Sarah Martinez existed on paper, but nothing in her history went back more than 6 months. No school records, no credit history, no trace before last winter. That's when he'd run her concealed carry fingerprints against the military database. They matched a name Bill didn't know but recognized instantly for what it meant. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chun, 1st Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, sniper qualified, 3 tours in Afghanistan from 2019 to 2023. Bill felt the old muscle in his jaw tighten as Jake continued. Medical discharge 8 months ago for severe post-traumatic stress after an incident in Kandahar. Her spotter had been killed by an IED, and she had disappeared before reporting for treatment at a VA facility. The Army had been looking for her ever since. Her service record, Jake said, was spotless. Multiple commendations, no disciplinary issues. But she had 47 confirmed kills, a professional marksman who had simply walked away from her life. Bill stared down at her application form again. The neat handwriting, the calm eyes, the precision at the firing line, all of it had been telling him something he'd only now begun to hear. Outside, Sarah was still with the others, guiding Tyler's hands on the rifle grip as though she had all the time in the world. Bill ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, his mind already weighing what to do with the truth he now carried. The last of the students drifted away as the sun slid lower, stretching gold light across the gravel and wooden benches. Janet left with a wave and a promise to call. Mark offered a quiet handshake, and Tyler and Madison ambled toward the parking lot, still murmuring about her shooting soon. The range was still except for the faint rustle of pine needles in the evening breeze. Sarah was wiping down the battered .308, the cloth moving in small, precise circles. The destroyed bullseye target lay folded on the bench beside her. Bill approached slowly, stopping a few feet away so his shadow didn't fall over her. His voice was steady when he spoke. "I know who you are, Staff Sergeant Chun." The rifle slipped in her hands and clattered onto the bench. For a heartbeat, her eyes locked on his, sharp with calculation, then softened into resignation. Her shoulders sagged. "How long have you known?" "Since about an hour after you took that first shot," he said, keeping his hands visible, his stance open. She looked away toward the mountains, their peaks etched in fading light. "Then you know what I did, and what I didn't do." Bill waited, letting the silence draw her forward. Finally, her voice came low and clipped, the cadence of someone used to reports, not confessions. "Kandahar. Overwatch for a convoy. Intel said clear, but the lead truck hit an IED. I was scanning for the trigger when the secondary went off under my spotter. Marcus." She paused, eyes flicking shut as though bracing for impact all over again. The breeze carried the faint call of a hawk overhead. Her hands rested flat on the bench, knuckles pale. I missed the signs. Disturbed earth. fresh tire tracks, things I should have seen. He was 23, had a fiancée, used to show me pictures of her in a white dress. Her voice hardened. A week later, we had a high-value target in our sights. Bomb maker, responsible for dozens of devices. I watched him for almost an hour through my scope before I took the shot, and I felt nothing. No justice, no satisfaction, just empty. Bill stayed still, the weight of her words settling between them. He knew the shape of that emptiness, the way it hollowed a person out until nothing remained but reflex. "So you left," he said quietly. "I told my CO I was done, took the discharge, didn't check in with the VA. I just erased myself." Her gaze drifted to the folded target, the neat hole that had consumed the bullseye. "You can't fix broken like this, Bill. You just learn to hide it." For a moment, the only sound was the wind in the pines. Bill thought of the young faces he'd lost in another war, the years spent trying to live with ghosts that didn't fade. "You're still here," he said finally. "That counts for something." Sarah met his eyes again. The wall between them cracked, but still standing. The battered 308 lay on the bench between them, as worn and functional as she was. And in that quiet, they both understood the truth. Survival was its own kind of unfinished mission. The air cooled quickly as the last light drained from the sky, leaving the mountains in silhouette against a deepening blue. The scent of pine grew sharper, carried down from the ridges by a slow, steady breeze. Sarah leaned back against the bench, arms folded, gaze fixed somewhere, far past the range. Bill stayed where he was, hands resting on the top rail, voice calm but deliberate. "You've spent years using your skills to take lives," he said. "Maybe it's time you used them to save some." Her eyes narrowed slightly, the words meeting resistance before they could take root. "I'm not a hero, Bill. I'm the one who survived when better people didn't." He didn't flinch at the bitterness in her voice. "Local search and rescue team needs someone like you. Every year, hikers and hunters go missing up there." He tilted his head toward the dark shapes of the mountains. "Last winter, a family of 4 got caught in a blizzard. We found them too late. If we'd had someone who could read the terrain like you do, maybe we wouldn't have been bringing back bodies." She shifted her weight, eyes dropping to the ground. "You think pointing me at lost tourists is going to balance the scales, that it's going to erase what I've done?" Bill's gaze held steady, the quiet certainty of someone who had fought his own long war. "I'm not talking about erasing anything. I'm talking about honoring the ones you lost by making sure fewer families get that call." For a long moment, neither spoke. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called, its voice carrying through the cool night. "You think I don't know what you're carrying?" he continued. "Vietnam wasn't yesterday for me, but I still remember every face. The good ones and the ones I had to put down. That doesn't go away. But the only thing that kept me from drinking myself into the ground was finding something worth showing up for again." Her jaw tightened. "And you think this is worth showing up for?" "I think Marcus would want you to try," Bill said simply. That name landed between them like a weight. Sarah glanced toward the mountains, the jagged peaks fading into the night sky. The SAR work wasn't combat, but the terrain would test her. The weather would fight her, and the stakes would still be life or death. She didn't answer, but her stance eased slightly, arms loosening from their tight fold. Bill didn't press. He knew the seed had been planted. Above them, the stars began to show, faint at first, then clearer against the dark. Somewhere in the distance, the mountains waited, their ridges sharp and unforgiving, but still standing just like her. The range was silent now, the echo of the day's gunfire long gone, replaced by the faint whisper of wind through pine. The last traces of light had slipped behind the mountains, leaving the shooting benches in shadow. Sarah sat alone at one of them, the battered 308 resting across her lap. She opened her cleaning kit, each tool laid out in its precise place. Her hands moved with the same quiet competence they had that morning, cotton patches and brass brush working in smooth, deliberate motions. The faint scent of gun oil rose as she ran the cleaning rod through the barrel. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost meditative, yet the motion pulled her back not to Montana, but to Kandahar. Heat shimmered off concrete rooftops, the taste of dust thick in her mouth. Through her scope. Marcus's voice had been calm, the low murmur of range calls and wind readings. Then the blast, a white-hot bloom of noise and force, ripped her world apart. She saw his position vanish in a churn of dust and debris, felt the sickening weight of knowing he wasn't getting back up. She set the rifle down for a moment, her hands tightening into fists. In the darkened glass of the office window, she caught her own reflection calm on the outside, fractured beneath. She picked the rifle up again, checking the action, oiling the bolt. Her mind shifted forward, unbidden, into a scene she had never lived. Snow blowing sideways across a ridgeline, a missing hiker's boot print half buried in powder. The sound of her own breathing in the cold as she followed sign through the trees, not lining up a shot, but reading the land, calculating a safe route before a storm closed in. The image felt foreign, yet not impossible. Her pulse quickened at the thought, not with the charge of combat, but with something quieter. She wasn't sure if it was purpose or just the echo of it. A nightbird called from somewhere up the slope. She reassembled the rifle, each piece clicking into place with mechanical certainty. The weapon was still bent, scarred, imperfect, yet fully functional. She couldn't help but see herself in it. Closing the cleaning kit, she ran a cloth over the rifle's stock, fingertips tracing the cracks held together with tape. Her mind still circled back to Marcus, to the way his absence had defined her every choice since. But now, for the first time, there was another thread in that loop, the faint outline of a life where her skill wasn't measured in confirmed kills. She set the rifle in the rack, its weight leaving her hands but not her mind. The wind picked up briefly, carrying the cold, clean scent of the high country. She didn't know if she was ready to take Bill's offer, but the fact that she was still thinking about it told her something had shifted. The mountains were out there, waiting. The last of the light was slipping from the sky when Bill found her by the benches, hands resting on the top rail as she looked out toward the darkening mountains. The breeze carried that same scent of pine she had noticed that morning, sharp and clean in the cooling air. She didn't turn when he spoke. Training starts Saturday. 0600. It's not going to be easy. Her answer came without hesitation, quiet but steady. I'll be here. Bill gave a single nod, the kind that said enough without adding weight to the moment. He didn't congratulate her, didn't try to press the significance of her choice. He simply stood beside her for a beat, both of them facing the ridgelines, the peaks now black shapes against a fading indigo sky. The range was nearly silent. Somewhere down the slope, a gate latch clicked in the wind. The benches, the racks, the worn concrete under her boots, all of it looked the same as it had when she first arrived, but the knot of tension in her chest had loosened, replaced by something quieter, not peace, not yet, but readiness. She glanced toward the battered 308 resting in the rack, the cracks in its stock catching what little light remained. It would stay here tonight, but she carried the feel of it with her, the balance and weight a reminder of what she could do. This time, though, the thought didn't come with the sharp edge of combat. Bill shifted beside her, adjusting his cap against the wind. Weather'll be turning soon. Good time to see what you can do in the cold. Sarah allowed the corner of her mouth to lift. Guess I'll find out. They didn't speak again as they walked toward the office, locking up in practiced silence. The sound of the last bolt sliding into place felt final, but not in the way it had before. At the edge of the lot, she paused, taking in the smell of gun oil lingering in the air, the outline of the firing line now just a dark stripe across the gravel. The mountains stood ahead, unmoved, their slopes already holding winter's shadow. She drew in a slow breath, letting it fill her lungs. This time, when she turned away, It wasn't to leave something behind. It was to face what was coming. The air was sharp and clear, the kind that carried the smell of pine even before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. Gravel shifted under Sarah's boots as she crossed the lot toward the low, weathered building that served as the mountain search and rescue base. The tree line stood dark behind it. Thin, morning light cutting through the branches in long, pale shafts. Inside the open bay, gear was laid out in precise rose packs, harnesses, helmets, coiled rope. A wall map marked with colored pins took up one side, contour lines curling like frozen waves. A couple of crew members glanced up as she entered, each offering a brief nod before returning to their tasks. No introductions, no ceremony. Bill stood in the doorway to the office, one hand resting on the frame, his expression unreadable but steady. He watched her for a moment, then stepped aside. She didn't need him to speak. The open space between them carried the message well enough. Sarah set her bag down by the gear rack, unzipped it, and began checking her kit piece by piece. The hum of quiet preparation filled the bay. Outside, the mountains waited, their slopes dusted with early snow.